Hello my friends, welcome to Lindy's Magpie Reads. If you're new here, I'm Lindy. So, it's Friday, I'm doing a Friday Reads. This is what I've finished in the past week. I just want to mention that last week for my Friday Reads, I had a little clip at the beginning of a coyote walking right in front of my neighbor's door. I could see the tracks in front of my door, but I don't have one of those cameras at the front. And Natalie was the only person who mentioned that coyote at the beginning. So if you didn't see it, you have another chance. I'm going to put that very short clip at the end of this video. So stick around for the coyote. And we've had a lot of beautiful hoarfrost lately, so I'll have a few of those images at the end as well. I haven't been doing much this past week besides put together my best of books of 2022. Those are up on my channel now. You can find them there. And in January, I decided to tackle this big anthology of Indigenous poetry called When the Light of the World Was Subdued, Our Songs Came Through. It's edited by Joy Harjo, and I have had it for a couple of years. I've picked it up and, flipped through, found some poems now and then, but now I'm systematically going through. Every morning I read one poem, or if a poet has more than one poem, then I read both of them. Yeah, poems are just a lovely way to start the day. So Jolene of Bookworm Adventure Girl has started a year-long reading challenge, Read Across Canada. And she has prompts for every month. I will link the relevant video below. January is to read a book from British Columbia, and that it be a book about nature. And so I have decided to read my shelves as much as possible, and I found this book for January. It's a collection of essays by Tim Bowling, who was born in British Columbia. He was involved in the salmon fishing industry for 30 years before moving to Edmonton, where I live. He's a poet and novelist, and this collection of essays, The Call of the Red-Winged Blackbird, I was so excited when it came out in the spring of 2022, and it's been languishing on my shelves, so I started it. I've read the first essay, and in the prologue, I love what he's got to say. All my life, I have responded most strongly to the sensibility behind a piece of writing rather than to its content or style. F. Scott Fitzgerald said, "We don't fall in love with a story, we fall in love with a voice." For me, the personal essay, even more than the poem, celebrates this distinctive individual voice while at the same time opening one door after another into the shared mysteries of the world. I definitely fall in love with voice when I'm reading. What about you? Anyway, I am going on to what I have read. Starting with a book that I read for my YA book club. We're meeting next week, so we haven't discussed this yet, but someone in the group suggested that Sarah Maas, who is such a huge name, our group has never read anything by her, so we should read something. We chose A Court of Thorns and Roses, which is first in a series, and it is a retelling of Beauty and the Beast. I listened to it in audio, read by Jennifer Ikeda. I really like Ikeda's narration, and it did help me get through this because I did not like this book at all. I am going to give spoilers here, so if you don't want this book to be spoiled, use those timestamps down below and just skip ahead to the next book. What I did like was the fairy tale retelling. What I did not like was all the romance. So we meet the central character, Farah. She's 19. She's the youngest of 3 sisters, and they come from a rich family, and they've fallen on hard times, and she is the person who is keeping everything going. She goes out and hunts for food, she chops the wood, she cooks, she does everything for her sisters and her father. When she accidentally kills a fairy because he's in the shape of a wolf, he doesn't know he's a fairy, she ends up having to go and live with the beast. You know the story of the Beauty and the Beast, so you know what the curse he's under, what she needs to do, but all she wants to do is run away and go back to the family where she's been a martyr so she can, work her fingers to the bone. But suddenly, I'm not sure why, she's fallen in love with him, but she won't say it because this is one of those stupid romance tropes that people don't communicate. And so then she has to leave because she's in danger, but she doesn't want to leave. Anyway, there are so many times where she acts impulsively without thinking, and yet at other times we're shown that she's a girl with lots of patience. She's able to, be a good hunter. Her character just doesn't make sense to me. There's another whole stretch where she's almost a sex slave for some other fairy, and this sexualization of her and humiliation is normalized. It's not, just the way that it's treated in the story really bothered me. I rolled my eyes so many times as I was listening to this. For example, twice her beast in his human form was covered in blood, and she could see all the muscles, and it was like a wet t-shirt contest, and how sexy those muscles looked. And the torture, the drawn out torture scenes from the wicked person fairy in this story was way too much for me. It is not my kind of book. Oh, there is going to be a love triangle coming up, I can tell, in the next book in the series, and it involves this same fairy who was doing sexually inappropriate things with her. So I just can't. I don't know. All right. The rest of these books are all books that I enjoyed. Another audiobook I listened to is How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water by Angie Cruz. The audiobook has got 2 readers, Kimberly Wetherell and Rossmery Almonte. It's all told in dialogue. There's lots of humor. It's about a woman who's in a senior work retraining program in New York City, and and her interactions with the counselor. It's the kind of audio production where they've added in extra sounds like subway doors closing and street sounds and stuff like that. And I loved it. I also read her book Dominicana, and I think this one is so much better. Yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. It's the voice. The voice is great. And next is another book that I listened to. There is no official audiobook. And that is because Sean, the book maniac, read this one aloud to me. It is Boat Number 5 by the Slovak author Monika Kompaníková, and it's translated by Janet Livingstone. This is a story set in post-communist Slovakia, told in third person, but very much from a child's point of view. The central character, Janka, is 12 years old. Her mother was a teenager when Janka was born, is not interested in being a mother, tells her, "Don't call me mama, call me Lucia." Her grandmother is not a nice person. Janka has got a place to escape to, so she lives in one of these concrete type Soviet era apartment buildings, but she can get away into the outskirts of the city where there are gardens that go up the mountainside, and her grandfather had a garden there with a little hut, and she not only uses that as a place of safety, but she ends up taking care of an additional child younger than herself and 2 babies. So how this all comes about, that's the story. For me, because I've been to Slovakia a number of times to visit relatives there, I felt all these extra layers that added to the story. And I also looked online when I heard that a movie had been made of this book, and I saw the trailer, so I will link that below to give you a flavor. But if you are interested in viewpoints of people from other parts of the world and the way that our daydreams can help us to cope, there's something quite haunting about this book. I gave it 4 stars, but it's one of those books that I might reconsider that rating, because I think it's going to stick with me for a while. Yeah, we'll see. And I'm also curious to see what Sean will say about it. I imagine he's going to be talking about it on his Friday Reads today as well. Next up is a picture book by the Indigenous author Doris George. It is called The Move, and it has a Cree title as well. This is a dual language picture book illustrated by Alyssa Koski, and there is an additional author, Dawn Philpot. This is based on a true story. In the early 1960s, in order to accommodate the building of a dam, the Manitoba government moved the community members of the Chemawawin Cree Nation to a different place. So they moved to a rocky shoreline that was so different from their old place. Their new house had no trees around it, but the old woman remembered things that she had been taught, and through her strong wishes, the trees and berry bushes from her old place magically grew up around their new house and they were happily at home there. There's a glossary at the end, this author's note, and there's a picture of the creators. The next book that I finished, which is Trust by Hernan Diaz. Lots of people have already talked about this already. What really intrigued me is that it is written in 4 separate parts, almost like 4 interconnected novellas. By the time I got to page 300, which is pretty far into it, it's only about 400 pages long, I couldn't put it down. So this is the kind of book that gets better and better as it goes along. There are 3 characters, a man who's a financier and his wife Mildred, and then a woman who worked for the husband, who I can't think of what his name is right now. It's a book that's really about storytelling, and that's definitely a hook for me. The reason that I picked it up when I did is because prior to that, I read Lidia Yuknavitch's book, Thrust. And just the title, Thrust, and I thought, I've been wanting to read Trust, one letter different. So that's why I picked that one up when I did. And trying to read my shelves, right? So I've saved Thrust till the end because it was my favorite book that I've read all week. Well, possibly boat number 5. It might be tied with Thrust, I'm not sure. Anyway, Thrust is also multiple storylines. It is set in New York City, different historical periods. We've got 1870, 1885, 1995, 2089. There's the Bartholdi, who's the sculptor who designed the Statue of Liberty, and he's writing letters back and forth with his cousin, who's in New York. Bartholdi is in Paris. And then there's a group of workers who are putting together the Statue of Liberty, constructing it, because it arrives in pieces. Then there's the future time when the ocean levels have risen and you can just see the torch, Liberty's torch, coming out of the water, and the rest of it is underwater. There's so much in there about working people, and especially child labor and concerns for children in general and the safety of children. A bit of a theme, I guess, with boat number 5. Anyway, there's a girl who can travel through time, Liv. She carries these copper pennies with her. And so many times in this book, there were connections to other books that I've read. Like in December, I read Carrie Fagan's children's novel, Water, Water, which ends with a new world that people have created with floating islands and greenhouses and stuff. And that's in Thrust as well. There are scenes of carnal pleasure. Aurora is kind of like a dominatrix, but in a very sex-positive way. I didn't much care for the erotica aspect of some of the storylines in Thrust, but I did like that sex-positive way of telling sexual desire with no shame. So there were apples and rope involved in these sex scenes. And kinbaku is mentioned, which is a particular style of Japanese rope bondage. And it brought back to me a story that I read quite a while ago by Lidia called Pulse. That was the first time I had heard of kinbaku. But in December, I read another book with a scene of BDSM that treated it quite differently. In Saga, Volume 10, the bad guy there is shown tied up, waiting for the dominatrix to come in. And in that case, his particular taste in sexual pleasure is used as a sign of his depravity. And it's an interesting contrast with how this is shown in Thrust. And even in Pulse, the rope bondage had more of a positive connotation. What I remember of that book was it was something about taking the pulse of the planet in order to heal afflictions. And in Thrust, this is a book about healing as well, and about nurturing bravery and strength of spirit in children. There are snakes in Thrust as well. Snakes, apples, Garden of Eden. Anyway, here's a passage. And the person is speaking about Liv. He encountered her when she was about 21 years old, same age as he was at that time. And Joseph is Mohawk, I believe. He says, "She was the most beautiful anything I'd ever seen, with the possible exception of a corn snake. Corn snakes, man, they have it bad. They often get mistaken for copperheads, even though corn snakes are harmless to humans." So there was a connection to Demon Copperhead, which I read in December. In one of the storylines in Thrust, there's a unloved teenage boy who's living in a crumbling apartment block, and he takes charge of a newborn baby when its mother dies. And that was the same week that I was reading Boat Number 5 with the unloved teenager taking charge of two babies. What are the chances? And one of the things about Aurora, so this is in the 19th century, Aurora lost her leg, one of her legs, in the American Civil War. I won't tell you how that came about, but her cousin, Frederick Bertoldi, carved her a artificial limb and covered it in carved roses. I don't know if you've read Krista Couture's memoir, How to Lose Everything. Her artificial limb is covered in flowers. And, oh yeah, in December I read Let Me Be Frank. Tracy Dawson talks about soldiers who were women passing as men, and also about the doctor, Mary Edwards Walker. And her philosophy was to save as many limbs from amputation as possible, for which the injured soldiers really grew to love her. So, yeah. Can you tell how delighted I am when this kind of serendipity happens? So, those are the books that I have finished this week. Thank you so much for watching. Comments are always welcome. I look forward to chatting with you. And stick around if you want to see that coyote and some lovely hoarfrost. See you soon. Bye.